for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and we have Neil Sanders from the truthseekersguide.blogspot.com. He is an expert in mind control tactics that are used by the powers that be and forces behind the scenes, everything from marketing, sales, indoctrination, programming, you name it. The list goes on and on. And one of the really cool things about Neil and his website is you can get to actual data and not just fluff from what somebody's uncle said at a dinner party many years ago. So this might just give you a different perspective on how easy it is to influence the masses, especially those that aren't in the know. Neil, it's great to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Just a real pleasure to speak with somebody like yourself that has so much knowledge and astute with this topic. I started researching mind control about 10 years ago and learned about the different conversational hypnosis tactics that people like neuro-linguistic programming, when you've got these very fluent individuals, whether they work for a corporation or in the government, political leaders, those that speak at religious gatherings, etc. And it really just opened my mind to how much is actually out there. And a lot of times people do it and they don't even realize it. They're just natural at it. But once you really become aware of how to use these tactics, I guess you could say, you can either use them for good or bad, I feel. And the people that are using them the majority of the time don't have our best interests at heart. So if you would, please tell us a little bit about yourself and why you got into this form of research.
Well, it was kind of just by accident, really. I did psychology and like media production at university. And all the technology that I learned on is now completely obsolete. but this sort of the techniques and what I discovered was that psychology actually bleeds into advertising quite a lot, and even something as basic as just constructing an advert or constructing a scene in a film. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, playing on like instinctual drives and that sort of thing. And basically, a friend of mine, or an older friend, forced me to watch a film called The Manchurian Candidate with Frank Sinatra in. And I was quite young, so I wasn't really that keen. But it blew my mind because it introduced me to different concepts, like the concept of essentially a false flag assassination attempt, but also obviously the mind control. And it really struck a chord with me because I've been sort of learning about Freud and the subconscious mind and a little bit about how hypnosis worked and stuff like that. And I started to think, oh yeah, that's fairly plausible, to be quite honest. So from there on, I sort of got into reading the books, really. Colin Ross and Jim Keith and John Marks and Dave McGowan was very, very good. His book was superb, in fact. And just started from then on, that gave me sort of avenues to look into. And you know how it is. Once you start to learn something, everything you see sort of starts to pique your interest. And so all of a sudden, different newspaper articles about, say, companies like Raytheon testing voice-to-skull technology on prisoners, all of a sudden piqued my interest in a way that it hadn't in the past. Or the British Army utilising SAS soldiers who've got complete perfect, or what they would call a perfect psychopathic personality, and trying to emulate and paste their brain patterns onto other soldiers so that they could all be this perfect psychopath, which is ideal for a soldier, I suppose. And just started to sort of amass more knowledge, really, just reading around the subject. And I was amazed how much declassified documentation there is. I mean, with MK Ultra itself, there was 149 sub-projects that we know about. I mean, basically, a whole series of papers was discovered by mistake. Some by John Marks, who put a Freedom of Information Act in, and some were sent to were filed under the wrong sort of heading, and so were discovered completely by accident. But as I said, from there you discovered that there was 149 at least sub-projects in mind control in just the American program. And they cover the entire gamut of social control, be that propaganda or social influence, or right down to the really sort of personal stuff, like trying to control your thoughts and control your actions and turn you into, essentially a remote-controlled robot.
Right. It's funny, too, because I watched a program the other day on Netflix. It just came out. It was kind of a low-budget film, but it was actually pretty good, especially the concept. And I brought this up one time before. These these kids that were going to, I think, Caltech University, they were working on this technology to be able to read somebody's mind. And they finally figured it out. And then the government got a hold of it. They had these plants that were working in Caltech, pretending to be college students, but they really worked with black ops, with certain corporations that were kind of funded by CIA and different alphabet agencies. And to make a long story short, when they got this tech, at first they thought that it was just going to be something that was going to be able to help people. But then, obviously, the powers that be wanted to use it to not only read people's minds, but to put thoughts in people's minds and control them. And the way that they were able to do it was they implanted these carbon tubes, these nanocarbon tubes, via injection into the spine. Therefore, it went into the bloodstream, and then that goes into the brain. So these nanoparticulates that turn into these carbon nanotubes actually allow this tech to work. And then they said, well, why don't we put it in the vaccines? So when babies are born, we'll inject them with this tech. And there's been a lot of stuff on alternative forums that have talked about trial runs where they've actually used certain nanotech in vaccines like the swine flu vaccine. I don't have any verification of that, but with so many of those being made in China nowadays, how easy would it be for a government like China, or even just influences of the government, people behind the scenes, to put that kind of stuff in this technology? Are they already there at that level, or is that next gen stuff?
Well, I mean, John Lilly and Antoine Raymond were talking in the sort of late 60s, early 70s about the ability to put implants into people's skulls with just a few. It sounds quite barbaric, but apparently it's quite painless and quick. Injecting straight through the skull and leaving what would be called a guideline, so that you could basically put an implant in to whatever degree. Now, obviously, that is slightly different to what you're talking about, but this was obviously many years ago. I have heard of in other sort of medical faculties the concept of sort of directed injections that sort of, if they put them in the correct place in the bloodstream, they can get to the correct organ or whatever. So I would suppose it's entirely plausible. With to be quite honest, with most countries, they have more broad systems of control that keep people in line, to be quite honest. So could they do that? In theory, I suppose, yes, they probably could by now. Would they do that? I don't know that they would deem it totally necessary at the minute, because, there are dozens and dozens of hidden and not so hidden control mechanisms that basically make the majority of people not be aware of what's going on. And, to paraphrase Noam Chomsky, not even be aware that they're not aware of what's going on.
Right. Well, it seems like there's this real big disconnect, and those that are awake are kind of put on different paths so many times it's tough to find the truth through all the BS. Yet
Absolutely.
We continue to search for it. And then you've got those that have the cognitive dissonance to the point of they don't want to know, or they just won't accept it, even if it's right in their face. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the psychology, the conditioning, the programming, the subliminal stuff that's out there. But talk to us about some of these documents and research that you've been able to obtain that would just blow somebody's mind, literally.
Well, I mean, just to sort of go to your immediate point about cognitive dissonance, perhaps, and that sort of thing. Why would people do that? Well, why, when you present them with facts, would they literally do a sort of Orwellian doublethink and move on? And a lot of that is perhaps to do with the concepts that were put forward by the Tavistock Institute. And the Tavistock Institute, you can find out these things about them. These started out as the Tavistock Clinic in 1921. It was formed to help soldiers that were coming home with shell shock, later known as a post-traumatic stress disorder. And later it expanded into the Tavistock Institute. So it started to look at more aspects of psychology, all to do with social psychology, to be quite honest. I mean, what the documentation seems to show is that when they were also connected to propaganda institutes like Crewe House and Wellington House, who were completely influential in directing people towards the war, and later helping direct Americans towards the Second World War. But rather than sort of helping shell-shocked soldiers, what they actually appear to have been doing was doing experiments testing the breaking point of man and seeing what could be done with somebody that was in a completely vegetative or malleable state, or somebody whose mind is cracked, if they can be of any use at all. And later they expanded, as I say, to the Tavistock Institute and started. This is where it gets really weird, because they started setting up and helping set up places like MIT and Stanford Research Institute and the National Institute of Mental Health in America and the Rand Institute in Esalen. And also they do something called authority and training, which is basically teaching CEOs of blue chip companies or politicians how to be better at their job. Well, now, how this becomes a bit sinister is that one of Tavistock's chief sort of techniques was devised by a gentleman called Kurt Lewin, who took over the Tavistock Institute in 1932. And he suggested two things. Well, essentially the same thing. Future shock, which is essentially it's society changing far too fast for the population to cope with, or alternatively he suggested that trauma or traumatic experiences should be imposed on the civilian population from an exterior point, so that this would basically reduce them to a state that he called either fluidity, a childlike state, or a tabula rasa, which is a completely blank slate that can be reprogrammed. And he says that in these times, when you're you're faced with great trauma, you will turn to an authority figure in order to be appeased of this and to get some sort of help. And thereby societies can be more easily controlled. This was taken further by Eric Trist, who was speaking to a press conference in 1965 when he was the director of the Tavistock Institute, said that the world, basically what their job was to do was to create social turbulence. Social turbulence was designed to make it so that people couldn't critically analyze situations and would need an authority figure to help them through life. And he proudly boasted in 1965 that thanks to the efforts of Tavistock and all their shock troops sent out to all these various institutions around the world, that the world was now in an irreversible state of social turbulence. So there's just a tiny bit of documentation that this is all provable. Once you're getting into say MK Ultra, then the documentation and the things that were done were incredible. Manchurian candidates were created, truth serums were tried, people were tortured with drugs, memories were wiped, personalities were created and destroyed. It even goes on to putting voices into people's heads, making people feel emotions, completely robotizing people so that they have essentially remote control functions, and to animals as well as later seemingly people. It was monstrous. It was absolutely monstrous. A lot of it involved, drugging people, torturing people, keeping people isolated, and a lot of it was. I mean, this is the overarching reason for that America apparently got into mind control was as a response to communist methods of mind control that were shown during the Korean War. But it actually it transpires that the Americans had started their investigations into mind control many years before the start of the Korean War. So this was in itself a mind control program. But what was most horrifying was that a lot of these experiments were done on unwitting citizens, unwitting civilians, and they were done under the guise of medical procedures that were designed to help people, specifically people with depression, postnatal depression, and alcoholism and that type of thing. So it got pretty monstrous.
Let me talk to you about some of the MK Ultra stuff, because from the research that I have done, and I haven't even been able to get, I'm sure, a tenth of what actually took place, but talk about some torture stuff where they would take people, fill their drinks up with LSD, hook them up to these lights or into these brain sensory mechanisms that messed with what they would see and feel. And then I heard stuff about how children would be literally killed in front of other children, and that would cause some type of fragmentation of the brain so that they could have these different alters and different personalities, and they'd see other babies in cages that were shocked and stuff like that. Is any of that available public record, or do you think that is not true?
Well, when it comes down to torture, a lot of it is on record. I mean, the point with a lot of the experiments was to do the breaking of man. A lot of it has actually been denounced as torture. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit fuzzy, because Joseph Mengele was doing experiments that seemed to be pertaining towards mind control, certainly at other Nazi institutes and concentration camps. They were doing experiments with mescaline and other drugs in order to break the will of prisoners. As I say, like a sort of a truth serum in an interrogation scenario. And one of the things that he did was he tested a thing called trauma bonding, which was basically really traumatizing children in incredibly vicious and violent ways, sometimes making twins kill their sibling. Um, and this would apparently, it sounds strange, but basically, if you institute enough trauma to a person, basically you can destroy their ego, essentially, beat down their sense of self to the point where basically they blame themselves for anything and everything that happens. But more strikingly, subconsciously, they know that you're more powerful than them and that you could kill them or you could cause them incredible harm. You could do whatever you wanted to them. So when you don't kill them, or I know this sounds very, very strange, but when you don't kill them, it's deemed as showing mercy, which is interpreted as love, which is why you get these strange instances where basically, well, this is how pimping works, essentially, or how people are sort of drawn to bullies, or people stay in violent relationships. Not in all cases, obviously, but this is the principle, and apparently this was done by Mengele. Now later, I think what you might be talking about with the other ones are people like Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor, and some of the stories that they might have told that, and that's debatable. They seem very, very plausible. There are a lot of elements that make it believable. There are a lot of elements that sound fantastical. That's not necessarily doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. And there's something very strange because those two sort of seem to fall out, and each one of them started calling the other one fake for a time. I don't know if they've still fallen out, but it's strange. I mean, certainly Paul Benassi, he was connected to the Franklin scandal. He talked about children being murdered and him having to murder children. Now, he was essentially sent to prison for perjury and then later exonerated and awarded $1 million, I believe. And basically, in the court case, they admitted that he had multiple personalities that were brought on by torture, including breaking his fingers, forcing him into a sex ring, and burning cigarettes on him, and that type of thing. And they admitted that this had caused multiple personalities and essentially verified his story. Like Ted Gunderson was the person that has done a lot of interviews with Paul Benassi as well. I mean, he talks about seeing a kid being killed at Bohemian Grove, and all of this was seemingly contributing to I mean, they talked about children being used in sex rings and being used as couriers for drugs and such like that. And again, there seems to be truth to this because there was evidence and surrounding circumstances as well that seem to back up these stories. Christine Dinicola and the other lady's name is escaping me at the minute. But Christine Dinicola was when she was about 9 years old, or younger, I believe, was taken to a place and put under some sort of mind control experiments, which were deemed radiation experiments under Project Artichoke, where she was taught to kill or stab dolls that looked like children, and she was tortured if she refused. And her co-defendant in that trial, which was in 1995. So again, these two women were essentially, their story was believed and exonerated in a presidential committee, and they were apologized to. Claudia Mullen, when she was 9 years old, was trained to be a prostitute with the explicit task of being given to leaders of industry and diplomats and politicians in order to ensnare them in a potential blackmail scenario. So it's not beyond belief. I don't know whether that's specifically true, but it's not beyond belief by any stretch of the imagination. But some things, as I say, all those things that I've talked about there are documented 100%.
Okay. And have you been able to find if many people that are in politics or Hollywood, certain entertainers, have gone through or been a part of some type of MK programming? And the reason I'm asking this is because Serena Williams comes to mind off the top of my head. And you know where I'm going with that.
She's got a multiple personality or dissociated identity, which is very, very strange. And I believe that there was some sort of strangeness in the way that she was. I could be totally wrong about this. That she was taught in quite an aggressive manner during the training for tennis. I could be completely wrong about that. It may have been. Tiger Woods, certainly, his father employed a drill sergeant, like a Marine Corps drill sergeant, like the guy in Full Metal Jacket, to shout at him whenever he got it wrong. So, I'd heard that Serena Williams had a similar thing, but I could be totally wrong about that. Britney Spears has reportedly got dissociated identity disorder. Lindsay Lohan has reportedly got dissociated identity disorder, and in both cases, Margot is, I believe, Britney Spears' British dissociated identity, and Diane, I believe, is Lindsay Lohan's. And in both cases, it's been reported by people who are close to them, like assistants and that sort of thing. That it's really strange. We don't understand it when they flip to this other personality, that they have no knowledge of this person, Britney Spears, or this person, Lindsay Lohan. Curiously, both of those were child stars. I mean, it depends how speculative you want to be, really, because you could also tie it into sort of comments that have been made by people like Corey Haim, and recently Elijah Wood, and various other people connected to that film, An Open Secret, and various other people throughout, recent years, that Hollywood is a nest of paedophiles, essentially, or that there is easy access for children in that industry. So it's strange. A lot of sort of musicians, like Mariah Carey's got a different personality, and Beyonce had spoken about how she becomes this woman Sasha Fierce when she's on stage and the like. How much of this is artistic speak for it's like I become a different person, and how much of this is genuine is debatable, but it's certainly very, very strange. Again, it depends how important you think that entertainment is, and a lot of people say, well, what's the point of that? Like, why would that even be a potential thing? Because it's just entertainment, they're just silly people singing silly songs and such like that. But to be quite honest, entertainment can be very important. It can drive something as basic as just economics. It can sell huge amounts of products and make billions and billions of pounds for different devices or companies all over the world. But also, depending on how paranoid you want to get, when you're not at work and you're not asleep, that's the time that you can start sort of summing up your life and going, it's not very good, this, is it? It seems like there's terrible, terrible inequality in the world, and everyone's really angry and like directing it in the wrong direction. Perhaps if we sat down and had a chat, we could, oh no, I can't do that because Top of the Pops is on, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So there is an argument that entertainment is vitally important and the type of entertainment is vitally important for the sort of the continuation of society. And anything that's sort of too anti-establishment or too against the grain, that makes people start to think, perhaps will get stepped on. And you have seen examples of this with, like, hip hop, for example, like Public Enemy, and the rise of gangster rap. You could even take it to basically Suge Knight and Murder Inc. and Jay Prince and somebody else named Dash, I believe. I could be totally wrong about that. We're trying to start a record company together. It would have been a huge black-owned record company. Now, mysteriously...
Wait, can I jump in real quick, Neil?
Yeah.
Did you just say that Prince was about to start a huge record
No,
label?
so Jay Prince. He's a southern hip-hop record.
Okay. I was like, wait a second. Prince just died. Was that?
No,
Okay.
It wasn't that. But
All right,
this was a few years ago, basically. And then lo and behold, there was all these sort of federal indictments looking into how these companies were connected with drug money. And what was bizarre was the one that was connected seemingly to CIA drug money, Death Row. They seemed to get away with everything. The ones that didn't were Murder Inc. And although they were later exonerated of any connection to the Supreme Team and that sort of element of organised crime, it cost them over $100 million or something like that in legal fees, and they never got it back. So it destroyed their business. So punk rock, that was very quickly neutralised by and turned into something that was a lot more palatable for everyday mainstream. Drum and bass, rave culture in England, people were basically having parties for free and getting together, tens of thousands of people in a field somewhere, no trouble at all, like literally no fighting. That was stamped down on. Now, there are always legitimate, in inverted commas, reasons for this, concerns for the safety and the moral well-being, etc., etc., etc. But again, depends how you really sort of want to look at it, I suppose.
Also, I have done some research into, I think it was several years ago, actually, the New York subways were testing some type of technology that could actually send voices into the subconscious minds, or not into the subconscious minds, but into the mind of somebody, so they're actually hearing it like you're talking to them right there. Have you done research into that stuff?
Oh, yeah, that's called synthetic telepathy. I mean, there's quite a few guys that have actually done that. The one, well, one was nearly tried actually in the Waco siege. There's a chap called Igor Smirnov, and he's actually Russian, but he has this device that's called the Smirnov pattern. And what it does is it plays like ambient noise, anything noisy, and then hidden beneath it, much lower, that you can't sort of hear, but your brain picks up, is another speech pattern. And what they were specifically going to try during the Waco siege, they got Charlton Heston to record a monologue where he was going to be God, appealing to David Koresh to peacefully come out of the compound. And they actually genuinely were going to try this. They only sort of backed out at the very last minute because Smirnov was. They said, "What's your chance of success?" And he said 70%. And he says, "What's the absolute worst thing that could happen if this goes wrong?" He says they could all go crazy and slit each other's throats. And so they decided to pass up on that and thought it would be far more sporting to set them on fire and then machine gun them to death instead. But they were going to use this this voice to skull interface. There's quite a few. There's Silent Sound or S-Quad that was actually used in the first Gulf War, and what this does is, again, it's suboral, and it beams. There's two ways that it can work. It can either just hit you with sort of feelings. I'll come on to that in a minute. That's a Ross Addy thing. What it essentially does is it puts messages into your head, like hopelessness inducing messages that you can't ignore, so that you just completely give up. This is why you see all those shots that were from the first Gulf War of like literally hundreds of Iraqi soldiers with their hands above their heads, all walking towards the American lines. Well, apparently they were in concrete bunkers, well embedded. They could have been there for months and months and months. Or maybe that's an exaggeration, but basically there was reports of 5-star major generals giving up whole battalions to a remote controlled helicopter with a video camera on it, and that sort of thing. A couple of times American soldiers did actually, there was one very famous, now incredibly difficult to get hold of speech where one of them says, yeah, well, they were deep embedded, and then we sent a couple of speakers over, and lo and behold, they came out. And speakers refers to these speaker systems that were on the bottom of helicopters or on the back of Humvees. And, this is again admitted. The company that, not by the American military, they deny it, but the company that actually made the technology for a time boasted about this on their website because they were very, very proud of their accomplishments. And then the company was bought up and the website completely disappeared. It's not putting voices into people's heads, but there's numerous people that have done voice to skull or synthetic telepathy. Michael Persinger's done it, and Andrija Puharek did it in a very, very simplistic way by putting a speaker in a filling in the back of your teeth. And a transmitter in another one, so that you could pick up radio waves. And actually, Lucille Ball of I Love Lucy fame, she reported to the police that she was picking up radio waves, and they thought, this is kind of nutty. What are these people saying? And she says she'd uncovered a Japanese spy ring in Hollywood. And they thought, again, this is a bit balmy, but we'll go along. And lo and behold, they uncovered a Japanese spy ring. So bizarre, but true. Now, the most terrifying of all these types of technologies is an extension of the Pandora project by a gentleman called Ross Addy. What they discovered was that for each distinct mood, say happiness, sadness, fear, there's a distinct wave pattern that your brain emanates or gives off that is picked up on an EEG machine, and this is universal. Basically, love looks like one thing, hate looks like another thing, etc., etc. What they found was that if you replicated these signals and put them on a microwave and fired them at a person's head, the brain would not be able to distinguish between this and an organic signal. It would assume that this was a real signal, and it would act accordingly. And there's no way that you can detect this, and there's no way that you can turn this off. So it can turn you into it can basically, within a second, put you into an absolutely psychopathic white-hot rage, and there's nothing that you can do about it.
Now, do you think that there's a possibility that some of these recent mass shootings, I'm not even going to say the Orlando one, because I think that there is a lot more involved with that than we're being told, yet some of the previous ones, like James Holmes, if you saw the look on his face, whether or not he did that, he looked like he was completely blasted out of his mind on some type of, pixie dust mind control or something.
Well, he looked to me like he was on Thorazine and struggling desperately to try and stay awake in the trial period, certainly. Thorazine was, one of the tested drugs for mind control. It doesn't, necessarily prove anything. But certainly with James Holmes, that his sort of lack of coherence about what happened, and I seem to remember him not not remembering doing it, or something like that, or not, or being very shocked that they'd arrested him because he didn't think he was involved in it, or something along those lines. But it's certainly possible, and it's certainly doable, and it's been tested, and it's been shown to be tested by the actual declassified documents. There was the other guy, was it the Navy shooter? I may be getting mixed up. The one person basically, I believe he killed some Marines. I may be totally wrong about that, but he was complaining that he was being bombarded with microwave weaponry, and this was again, I believe, just dismissed as well. There you go. He's obviously insane. That's why he did it. Case closed. But these technologies do exist. I mean, in the Russian parliament, I believe it was in the 90s, a Russian politician called Vladimir Lopatin, based on the experiments of Igor Smirnov, called for these weapons, psychotronic weapons as they were called, to be completely outlawed for use, particularly against civilians in Russia. So they take it seriously, and they do exist. Basically, as I say, there's been numerous experiments. One of the most recent ones was Raytheon, which is a weapons company, and they were experimenting in voice to skull reasoning, like you say, putting messages into people's heads.
Now, let's take that to the next level then. If there's a couple crafty tech gurus in their garage, I mean, if they had the right stuff, it sounds like it wouldn't be that difficult to create this type of technology yourself, put it together.
Well, I mean, I think you can, to an extent, you can buy some of it. There was always rumors that the Om Shirinko cult, the one that released poison gas onto the Japanese subway, that they'd got one of these devices, possibly from Cytec, I believe, which is an American CIA-backed company that actually sort of looks into remote viewing. It was connected to the projects that were discussed in the Men Who Stare at Goats book and film. And people like Inga Swan and John B. Alexander actually were, or at least were, the heads of that particular department. But yeah, so in theory, yes. I mean, the thing is, basically, I think it'd be very, very difficult to actually find the specifics behind any of the technology, because there's huge gaps in the documentation. For example, there's lots of stuff about hypnosis and how effective that can be used, and it goes against all the sort of accepted wisdom on hypnosis that your common or garden hypnotherapist could do. I'm a hypnotherapist myself, and I couldn't do any of the stuff that is recorded in the MK Ultra documents, and I'm pretty good. I'm not the best, but I'm not bad. But I couldn't do any of those things. Now, my suspicion is that basically there's huge gaps in the material. I think in order to make these hypnotic techniques work, you would need a degree of trauma and a degree of isolation and manipulation on the well-being of the subject first. Not in all cases, but I think in order to do the things like make people split down personalities and shoot their friend and not have any memory of it, which was all recorded, all documented, would need an element of trauma. And similarly, I think with the mind control technology, I think A, struggle really to find any schematics or anything like that, and B, if you did, there would be huge gaps in the actual sort of technology. But hey, somebody made it. So anything's possible, I suppose. How much money you would need and how much know-how is debatable.
Now, also with the satellite technology, I'm wondering if they could actually pinpoint certain geographical locations, like 5 mile square radius in the Middle East or in the Midwest, whatever, and could kind of control people's, make them upset, make them sick, just via electronic pulse. And then I've also read about satellites that can pick up the brain waves similar to an EEG and then transform that brainwave into the actual word or what that person is thinking, sensing, feeling, etc. Have you been able to pull any documentation about that?
Not on satellites, but certainly on the effects that you're talking about, making people either feel ill or feel rage or sadness or whatever. And a lot of that again pertains to, say, people like Ross Addy and Smirnoff and that type of thing. Satellites. Well, John B. Alexander wrote an article called I forget what it's called now, but basically in that he's discussing and sort of it was in a American military sort of monthly magazine that's circulated within the military, and he's basically bragging about how developed their psychotronic weaponry is, and he says essentially that there's no reason that basically the entire world could be mind controlled given the want, because they have the technology they have this technology, and they can transmit it at great distances. I mean, as early as the 60s, this involved implants called stymosevers, but people like Jose Delgado that strongly believed that for their own good, the general population should be turned into robots. He had developed in as early as 1965 remote control operation that could run to 3 miles. Later, when they were doing similar remote controlled type experiments on dolphins and dogs under subproject 62, this got much further because obviously you need to be able to send these animals into the field, so to speak. When it comes down to the silent sound and the like, that you've got, I think you're talking about a kilometre, maybe something like that. But you could use certainly drones and to get closer. There's no reason to think that you couldn't use a satellite to do it. To be quite honest, if it can transmit a signal to my television fairly simply, relative to satellite technology, everyone's got a satellite box now or whatever. I'm pretty sure they could do that should they want to.
And go ahead.
Whether they have it there, you'd have to get the weaponry up there, which I'm sure they could do. I don't know. I haven't read anything that proves it's there. But all the other things that you've said are documented. They've done all those things and can do them and have been doing them basically.
Well, now you've got high definition televisions, which are 4K now instead of just 1080. Yeah. And you wonder now let me talk to you about this then. I read a study once about how if somebody sees another person get into a car accident, the part of the brain that is activated is the same part of the brain as the person that actually is in that accident. Therefore, they're actually living it almost. And then you've got these movies out there with the subliminal programming to create these certain archetypes overall. Programming, I love that name because that's literally what it is. Get ready for your latest programming, folks. I wonder how much control and influence that actually has on people's minds to go out and do certain things. I've talked to those in the know, like Hollywood insiders, Dono Grills. He's friends with Samuel Jackson, and he tells me that the stuff that they do in the movies are almost like rituals to these guys, magical rituals. And I've wondered that myself too, combined with the mind control and the tactics that are used. I think it's all kind of incorporated in one. Magic is science and science is magic.
Well, first I want to talk to you a little bit about television, but then please don't let me forget, I want to talk to you about a thing called stochastic terrorism, and how it can affect all sorts of things, to be quite honest. Television is incredibly powerful because basically, it dictates, it gives you heroes, it gives you aspirations, it gives you the news, it tells you who's successful, it tells you who's not successful. On a sort of more personal level, television to an extent can hypnotize you, and a lot of people sort of misunderstand this and think that the sort of the waves coming out of it like hypnotize you like sort of Rasputin or something like that. It's not quite like that. It's the
just
eye
relax
fixation
and calm down. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's the eye fixation and the sort of repeated habitual nature of what you're doing. And you basically, because you relax, your brainwaves slow and your conscious mind is distracted, and your subconscious sort of becomes more prominent. Now, the thing about subconscious mind is that it has no critical analysis. It basically takes everything that you say on face value. So this is why advertising is so successful, and this is why things like polling, 93% of people say this, blah, 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 is so effective because you absorb it as a fact. If you want to sell a product, all you need to why do they drape beautiful ladies over cars? It has no connection to the car, but your subconscious mind just makes that connection. I like ladies. Oh, I like that. Therefore, I like the car, and it's as simple as that. That's why That's why again, celebrity endorsement is so incredibly powerful. And a lot of this is to do with instinctual drives, because basically social information is vital. If you see the person lose, if we're cavemen and that person's made fire, if I go and watch how he's made fire, well, I might be able to make fire, and therefore might be able to survive. And in a modern situation, that person's quite successful. He doesn't worry about his bills or etc. He gets to do things that he likes. If I absorb some of the lessons that he's learned, I can be a bit more like him, and then perhaps I can be more successful in my life. And so this is how incredibly influential television can be, and that's before you go into the sort of the hidden element. For example, you'd be astonished how many programs are sponsored by the military, like JAG, and films, obviously Top Gun, but things like the Transformers films and such like that. And I say numerous, they're all escaping me now, but numerous television series and various other media outlets are sponsored by the military. And often there's a sort of quid pro quo sort of thing. Like in England, we have this program called Top Gear. I think it's on America as well. But basically, every so often
Good
they'll have.
series.
Yeah, it used to be. They've changed the presenters now. They have lots of military equipment on and stuff like that. But the sort of flip side of that is that they always advertise the military charities, and also basically it makes the military look good. And so it's a very sort of quid pro quo type of thing. This also happens in the writing of television programs and films, where basically they'll need like military equipment, or perhaps want to use a location or that side of thing. And you can approach the military, and they have a department in Hollywood where basically you can arrange to hire all of this equipment. However, they get final rewrite of the script. They might not change a lot, but fundamentally you're not making the military look bad. In fact, you're making the military look good. Sometimes in a very overt way, sometimes in a very, very subtle way, just making it look cool. And what's the point of that? It's to aid recruitment, and it's to aid sort of popular support for the military, and by proxy popular support for foreign policy campaigns, because obviously that's what the military does. So thereby, yes, television can be incredibly influential. If you want to see a very obvious example, just look at any new fashion trend that's started by a celebrity or started by a television show. In England, after Friends came on, everyone wanted to go and sit in coffee shops, and that's why Starbucks and all these other sort of coffee shops sort of piled into England. They didn't exist in England before Friends. We had cafes, which were actually, you sat down and had a meal and and that sort of thing. But that sort of sitting around, lounging, having coffee culture was totally, totally alien to England until Friends came along and sort of introduced us to it. I don't know whether it was a big thing in America, to be quite honest, but it certainly was afterwards, wasn't it? So that is how television can be influential. But also there's a thing called stochastic terrorism. Now, what this basically means is it's somebody who's, by their actions, usually through a media outlet or media platform, basically through their actions and through their words and through their ethos or ideology or preachings or whatever, encourages other people either to a nonsensical direction, or usually into a sort of an action of terrorism or that sort of thing. And basically this could be seen as somebody like, say, an Osama bin Laden character, who obviously tells people do this, and that might appeal to some disenfranchised youth sat in Afghanistan or whatever, and he might go and blow himself up. So that would be a form of stochastic terrorism. You could also say that of certain media people like I know Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Rush Limbaugh, that sort of thing, who through their actions and words might give people a rather blinkered view of the world, which might encourage them to hate the wrong person, take all their anger out on that, and go and beat them up and probably beat them to death or something like that. So that could be a form of what would be called stochastic terrorism. Now, what I've started to wonder is whether basically the introduction of certain stories, theories, themes, hoax, news stories, etc., is a form of very, very clever stochastic terrorism by intelligence agencies at the minute. Putting stories that are different theories about that people cling to very, very strongly, very, very quickly as well. And all that does is basically, rather than fomenting dialogue or proper investigation, it gets people to stick to a point, because essentially, they've come to that information or whatever. I think a lot of this is exacerbated by social media, and then basically people just argue. And so I wonder if there is particularly with the rise of the internet and the ease that people can get information. I really wonder if there is a form of intelligence-led stochastic terrorism going on at the minute.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up the internet, because one of the things that I've noticed with certain search engines being so powerful, as far as when you look something up, you always go to a certain search engine, and that might learn your habits, obviously. And then with AI technology, supercomputers that can calculate quadrillions of floating points per second. I actually did some calculations several years ago, back in, I think this was 5 years ago, back in 2011. And the supercomputer at that time, that was one of the most powerful in the world, that at least the public knew about, could calculate millions of floating, or millions of calculations per person per second if you took 7 billion people on the world at any given time. So with the right software, and then you've got all these computers around the world that people are using constantly, and then the video surveillance and everything else, with the right type of program, you would be able to really influence people just upon when they look something up, based upon what they will find. If, for example, you want to look up conspiracy theories, you type in conspiracy theory, and then on Google, you're going to have a certain amount of search options that come up, but another person on the other side of the world might type in the same thing in Google, and they're going to have different stuff come up. So that's going to influence the person as well, right?
Totally. In fact, that's exactly what I mean. And I just think that with a lot of things that are floating around at the minute, as always, you've got to be aware that the intelligence agencies are they're very, very clever. They've been doing this a long time. And so things that seem plausible on the surface could in fact be complete red herrings, and well-meaning people could have been sent down the garden path, essentially. And I just think that, it's always healthy to examine things like that and think, actually. The other point is that people don't, when people have a theory nowadays as well, they don't want to hear anything that contradicts it. There's no discussion on Facebook. There's absolutely no discussion at all. Somebody puts something up and you go, I'm not sure that that's true, mate. Have you read this? And rather than, no, I hadn't. Thanks for pointing me into that direction. You get into an argument. 9 times out of 10, they go, oh, you believe that then? Well, what about this? I wasn't talking about that. Yeah, well, what about this? It's like, well, I have answers for that as well, but we weren't talking about that. Christ, I don't even want to get to an argument. I've learned something. I thought you might want to know it. In the same way that you'd learned something, you thought, well, I want to know about it. Now we're going to get into discussion, because that's sort of the point of social media, isn't it? But it's not. The point of social media is for everybody to agree with one another, apparently. That's it. You're not allowed to have contrary views, because then, oh God, you're obviously an MI5 agent.
Oh, don't forget, you're a shapeshifter that drinks blood as well, because you are with MI5. That's one of the requirements on the internet.
Social media totally exacerbates this, right? Loads and loads of studies have been done that basically it does two things. It promotes narcissism and it promotes depression. Those are the two things that it does. Now, here's a very interesting thing before I sort of expand on this. When you look at the sort of MK Ultra documents, like psychological operations in warfare, human resources exploitation, and all that sort of thing, one of the chief proponents of any mind control technology or any mind control program is to isolate the person and overstimulate them. Now, usually that means put them in a cell on their own and play white noise, because it drives you insane, fuzzy noise or whatever. But doesn't that perfectly describe everybody on Facebook? You're isolated because you're sat on your own, but you're overstimulated because you're dealing with a dozen threads and numerous things flashing in front of your eyes. Basically, it promotes narcissism. It's a bragging post, isn't it? You've got to go on there. Now, this is confounded by the fact that basically, studies have also shown, most people lie, or at least lie by omission. Some people just basically, there's hundreds and hundreds of Instagram fails, Facebook photo fails and stuff, where people are lying about their life and stuff like that. But everybody tends to do it in a very, very subtle way. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. But for example, you might pick the best or the funniest photo. You might rewrite a quote. Here's the thing. Basically, what happens is when you start getting likes and responses and stuff like that, you get a dopamine response. You get a physical response from your brain. So you might, again, start to lie about your output. You might start to get more likes. You might start to create an online personality. You might do it in a more subtle way. You might notice that, hey, when I bring up this subject, all I get is grief. So I'm not going to bring that subject up. You know what this is doing really, really subtly? And this might sound extreme, but what it's basically doing is gambling with social information. You put something out and you get that big dopamine rush. You get a negative response, and it destroys you. So basically, you're gambling. But what is this subtly telling your subconscious? maybe not your conscious, but your subconscious is figuring out slowly, hang on, your Facebook profile, which is basically the edited highlights, the best of, is far more popular than you. It's got 4,000 friends. You've got 5, which is a bloody good number to have, by the way. Like, but what's that teaching people, particularly young people, particularly people who are more prone to the need to latch onto groups because they're socially vulnerable or not particularly good at mixing with people in the physical sense. And there's 2 other things. Basically, the other things that social media does is it makes it like you need to have an opinion. And that at first that you need to have an opinion, and secondly that your opinion is far more important than it actually is. And so you get people like, I haven't seen this, not until I've seen this. Well, you don't get to see that. It's nothing to do with you. Remember who you are. And the other thing with Facebook and any social media is you can fall into the habit that you think you're actually accomplishing something. Oh, I've posted 17 articles about the New World Order today. Look at me, I'm an activist. You're not an activist. You're lying to yourself. Get off your arse and do something. If you want to, that's fine. It's fine to do all of these things. But for crying out loud, don't use that as a way to look down on other people, because that's all I see is people putting out information. Okay. And then when anyone has a counter view, they jump on them. And then all their supporters jump on them. And it becomes very, very nasty and very, very schoolyard. And I think that the thing is as well, people can get away with it on social media because there's often not, you don't see I was horrible to that person. And what a horrible thing to do. You don't see the immediate response. You've got a separation because of the screen, which is very, very akin to you ever heard like photojournalists in war situations saying, I just keep the camera in front of me because that separation makes it not real. Well, in the same way, it's not the same as getting into an argument with somebody in the street. Most people wouldn't say the terrible, hurtful things that you say on social media to somebody's at the face. And the other point is the context of it. Like, if you post something up and you've really thought about it, okay, and you've put your heart and soul into this post and you post it up, and somebody comes along and goes, yeah, you're a wuss, man up, and then just goes, well, to you who's posted that, that's like somebody's done a drive-by at your mum's, basically. Like, that's so like, oh my God. Like, to the person that's posted the insult, they're probably never going to think about it again. So there's this disconnect in how people actually react. And the final nail in the coffin is that on Facebook and all social media, you've got an audience. Despite the fact that you're alone, you've got an audience, and you have to play up to that audience or risk that audience's wrath. So you might be put into situations where perhaps you're not going to let them talk to you like that. You're not going to let them punk you, are you? Hell no. No, I'm going to bring out the big guns and, insult them in a really nasty way or whatever. And again, all of these things, you just, I find it quite distasteful at times, to be quite honest. But, emerging technologies, what can you do?
And when you get into the social media thing, it seems as if now, if I ever look out at there's a bunch of people walking around, it seems like 3/4 of them are on their cell phones with their face in the phone. Even if they're hanging out with their friends or coworkers, the phone now, if you're not on the phone when you're standing around, it's almost like you feel awkward. That's the kind of presence that they're getting out there. You wake up in the morning, you pull open your phone if you're the kind of person that gets on Facebook first thing to check out what everybody's having for breakfast and what the new emoji is of the day. And it really kind of not only gives you this disconnect, but like you said, this narcissistic archetype. I find that fascinating that you bring that up. Do you think that it's going to get to the point where they're kind of pushing this virtual reality set now? Maybe people won't even leave the house unless they have to. They'll just turn into this idiocracy type where people are just getting stupider and stupider. They're turning to be 500 pounds. They're force feeding themselves with pharmaceutical drugs and GMOs, but yet they're in a VR set so they can be perfect and dance around and do whatever they want.
Well, I mean, it's not quite got as quite as bad as that. Well, one of the problems is that people, now here's a weird thing, right? Okay, people fall in love with their phones, not in a hyperbolic sense, in a physical sense. They've done studies, and particularly with Apple products, because not only because of the seeming lifestyle that it gets, because of the association with glamour to an extent as well. iPhone when iPhone users hear the iPhone ringtone in tests, they get the same synaptic response that you would normally get when you see a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So they have physically fallen in love with their phones, which is bizarre. But here's the thing, right? Laptops, mobile phones. What was the point of those? The point of those was to be stress saving. This is supposed to make your life easier. Because you get emails on the move and stuff like that. You can whatever. Does it make your life easier? Hell no. Now you can work on the train to work. Well, damn. Thank you, technology. Now you can work 24 hours a day. Now you can't escape work emails if you've got your email phone or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So it's absolutely ridiculous. One thing I have noticed is that kids, a couple of my mates have got kids, 16, 17 or whatever. And they're like, what are you up to tonight? Oh, big party, we're doing this, blah, 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 blah. And he runs upstairs. It's like, is he going to get changed? No, what he means by that is they're on the Xbox. And because of the technology, you don't have to leave your house to see or chat with your friends as much anymore, basically. I don't think it's a good thing. I hate it when you go into restaurants or pubs or whatever, and just everyone's got their phone out at a table. Like, and nobody's talking to one another. I usually have a rule that's like, no, we're not, you put your phone away. Like, don't put we can go an hour without your phone. Like, if there's an emergency, which is what it's for, it's in your pocket and it will ring. But it's not got there yet. But the thing is, it's sold as glamorous as well, though, isn't it? We're on magic technology.
The new Samsung 23,000. It's got
Exactly.
4 billion megapixels.
Yeah. Like, what's really stated, like, oh, I get so many more photos and stuff like that. You're probably right, and videos and stuff like that. You're never going to look at most of them, like, to be quite honest. Like, so, it's strange. But what are you going to do? People seem to like it at the minute, because I think it's because it gives you the illusion that that it's quite glamorous, quite futuristic, and, it's a bit Star Trek, isn't it?
Let's jump into the possibilities of the microchipping society. There's a lot of people out there that have already been microchipped. I've actually interviewed Zoltan Istvan, real nice guy. He's actually running for president, and he's a part of the transhuman movement.
Oh.
And that that used to be one of the most frightening things in my mind, was the singularity possibility where you had these Terminator-type AI tech that was even beyond that. For example, those that watch the X-Men films, there was one, not the most recent, but before that, where this AI technology became so powerful that it actually could take out all the mutants. It just was beyond anything. And I've wondered before, with the right type of technology combined with an AI interface that can actually think for itself, what could possibly happen? Would we become the food, kind of like in the Matrix? So really, if you think about it, because you could have this robot body that could walk through nuclear waste dumps, it could handle extreme temperatures, not have to have carbon-based food, maybe just feed off of the sun, and if the sun is blocked, then have some other type of nanotech to harvest the particulates around it as a matter form. I don't know, but we have limitations right now.
Oh yeah, in theory, like I suppose in theory it's possible. I mean, you've seen those. Are they actually called hunter killers? Some of them, like they look like horses, or sort of like
the eater,
like,
yeah, and the
and
EATR,
snake ones and different things and stuff like. So
The
they're
mule.
certainly looking at stuff like that. I mean, even drones. Do you know what I mean? Like that. I mean, obviously there's people behind them and stuff like. Well, I suppose some of them might be, just purely remote, but yeah. I mean, it's all getting a bit. Weird. I mean, it's not quite that far, but they certainly have done tests like that with soldiers, American soldiers. They've got a thing called transcranial magnetic stimulation, and basically they put it in. Nobody really knows how it works, but it seems to when you put it in somebody's helmet, it makes them nearly impervious to pain. It makes them think faster, and for a time, whilst it's on, more intelligent. It makes them not need to sleep, and it seems to make them physically stronger as well. Now, if that's not sort of like scary enough, what we're combining this with, again, for medical reasons, for the good of the soldier, in order to treat post-traumatic stress disorder, or to prevent post-traumatic stress disorder from taking effect, which is, you can't deny that is a desperate need. It's a horrible, horrible, debilitating condition. You really feel for anybody that suffers from it, which is how they justify stuff like this. What they were suggesting was a course of drugs that essentially do two things. One suggestion was that they alleviate the emotion of guilt from people, so that they don't feel bad about things that they do. And the second was to basically to wipe any harmful, in inverted commas, memories completely, so that they would no longer affect the person. So what you're talking about there is essentially, super strong, super fast, don't need to sleep, can make decisions on the spin, in a flash, that have no guilt and may not remember what they've done. That's it makes me feel uneasy.
Absolutely, as it should. And anybody else that has an opportunity to listen to this podcast might want to think about the possibilities as well. Now, when you look at so many people being on some type of pharmaceutical drug, the majority of these mass shootings the past 15 years, according to the research that I've done, the shooter was on some type of psychotropic drugs. And I'm wondering how much more control that gives certain triggers or handlers, I guess you could say, for people that are under these psychotropic drugs to actually get them to do their bidding. Have you done research on that?
Well, I mean, I've noted the correlation, and it is a tricky one because the argument would be that basically, well, of course they're on SSRIs or antidepressant drugs. There was something wrong with them, as was evidenced by the reason, the fact that they went in there and shot a load of people up. So it's very difficult. I mean, there's numerous stories of these drugs causing violence, in studies, and it says on the packet that they can cause mood swings and rage and suicidal feelings even. Often it leaves people with a very, very blank feeling. I mean, here's the big thing, right? Again, this isn't even a conspiracy theory. This is a fact. Not that it's all been facts, but you know what I mean. This is admitted. SSRIs and antidepressant drugs do not treat depression per se. They mask the symptoms of depression. You know what? If it's working for you, that's great. That's absolutely great. But there are perhaps more effective things that can be done. And so, yeah, it's very strange. You can certainly hypnotize people when they're on SSRIs with no problem at all. It doesn't affect their concentration in that sense. So it's certainly possible. It is certainly possible. Whether you need it is a point. I mean, perhaps so. Perhaps it does act as some sort of conduit, or greases the wheel, so to speak, or whatever. I don't think you'd need it. But then again, I don't know what technology they're using at the minute. So I can only go off the things, the snippets that they occasionally leak out in newspapers, reports, and technological reports, and that the scientific manuals and stuff like that. Usually boasting, and it's only after you read it that you go, my God, these people, what's wrong with them? But I mean, well, at the minute, as one of the most sort of public things was putting different thoughts in people's heads. They do it, transferring people's essentially personalities. They transferring thoughts between chimps and stuff like that. So there are numerous ways that you could make somebody go into a school or go into a nightclub or go into a public area or wherever and start shooting. And there's numerous ways that you could do it. I mean, you could do it with hypnosis. Now, again, most people will tell you, and this is true for 99.99% of hypnotists, you can't make people act or do something that they would not normally do in their normal life, or go against their moral code. Now, George Estabrooks, who was an MK Ultra doctor, said that this is nonsense, that given the right conditions, he could make any man commit treason, murder, or suicide, and this person would never know that they'd done it, and never know that they'd been hypnotized, particularly if they committed suicide. But you get my point. Now, there are three ways that I think you could do it. You could frame it as a moral action. If you could convince somebody that the world was going to end or his family was going to be killed unless he did something, then that would be a way that you could manipulate somebody to do something. You could also frame it as a mundane action. This would take more skill, but apparently this is what happened to Sirhan, the apparent assassin of Robert Kennedy. He says, I remember shooting at the target range. I remember drinking Tom Collins's, and then I was shooting at the target range, and then everyone jumped on me. And that's so. The suggestion is that he was thinking he was doing a relatively mundane action, and unfortunately, the target turned out to be Bobby Kennedy. I actually think that Bobby Kennedy was killed by Eugene Caesar, who was the guard stood behind him. But that's another story. And then the final and most devious way that you could convince somebody with hypnosis to do something terrible is by instilling so much trust in them that they would never think that you would do anything to hurt them. And this is really grim, but it's basically like, jump off that building, and you'd be going, oh, that's insane. But I trust this person so much that although it looks like I'm jumping off a building, I know that he would never let anything bad happen to me, and you jump off the building or shoot the person or whatever, and only realize far, far too late that it was too late. So there's very, very many ways that you could influence somebody to I think that's just using hypnotism. That's not using any devices or anything like that. I reckon you could very easily convince people to go and commit acts like that. But I also think that there's a lot of evidence in these shootings that there are more people there, perhaps, who are more professionally trained, and these people are often patsies.
You know, and I got to bring up Dr. Darren Brown, and he is the most incredible instant hypnosis guy that I have ever seen. He'll go up to people and ask for directions, and then he'll end up with their wallet and cell phone, walk away, and then they'll start scratching their head about 5 or 10 seconds later, and they're like, what in the heck just happened? And then he'll come back and give their cell phone back and stuff. But I want to bring up the MK Ultra again real quick, the trigger words, because the research that I've done, there was different triggers like alpha, beta, theta, and they would say, okay, alpha, and then this person had a certain reaction to that. And then you brought up the suicide thing. I think it was theta that was actually used as a suicide trigger. And with the control that's able now, I'm wondering if they do have certain trigger words in people that they could just activate via a television set or something without even having to get their hands dirty.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, a post-hypnotic trigger would work with just basic hypnosis, to be quite honest. Now, if you want to see somebody who's incredibly impressive at putting people into instant hypnosis, YouTube a guy called Gil Boyne. My God, he basically he'll just walk up to anyone. You come here, bang, done. It's a technique called pattern interrupt. I know how to do some of it. I'm not going to tell you how because that would give away the secret. But yeah, quite. Or I could tell you, but then I'd have to hypnotize you so you wouldn't remember. But but yeah, he's incredible. Darren Brown. Now, what's interesting about Darren Brown is I think the reason he's able to sort of showcase it is because of the mixture of illusion and different techniques. Some of the techniques, as a trained hypnotherapist, I recognise. I know what he's done there. Actually, I don't know whether I could do it with as much skill. In fact, I know I couldn't. But certain things you can see. That's where he's done that. That's where he's done this. He'll have put in some sort of previous post-hypnotic suggestion, like pressing the back of their hand or whatever, and this will put them into a different state. But because he mixes it up with some stuff that is obviously camera trickery or more traditional magic, trapdoors, sleight of hand, that type of thing, it blurs the lines. Do you know what I mean? So you could I've seen people or heard people arguing as to whether it's real or not, to be quite honest. The one I heard was like, oh, you think Darren Brown actually hypnotized that bloke? Do you think David Copperfield actually flies? Come on, it's a trick, it's the television. But then I've heard other people like, oh, it's amazing, yeah, you can do that. But it's a strange one because it frames it in the realm of entertainment. It frames it in the realm of flight of fancy. So does it give it more credibility? Does it give it less credibility? It's a strange one, to be quite honest. I think you'd struggle to use Darren Brown as proof if in a court of law, blah 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 blah. And if we look at the actions of Mr. Darren Brown, you can see that. I think at that point that would be dismissed as the entertainer Darren Brown. That's ridiculous. So who knows, really? But he's certainly very skilled.
Well, and you brought up entertainment factors. So if you look at stage hypnosis versus hypnosis, I was wondering if you could kind of break down the differences and explain to people what hypnosis really is and the different levels.
All hypnosis is. I mean, nobody really knows. That's the most honest answer I can give you. There is incredible debate as to whether it's a somnambulant state or whether it's like a fugue state or whether it's even a naturally occurring state. There's even debate as to whether you actually do anything or it's just power of suggestion, or people do it on their own. There's a huge number of different arguments and stuff like that. The thing is, that basically it's like electricity. Nobody really understands exactly what electricity is or how it works, but it works. So we work it. I understand that we understand amps and things like that, but there are faculties and elements of electricity that we don't understand. We just have to. There's lots of things we don't understand, but they work. All that hypnosis is in the sense of a hypnotherapist is he's putting someone in a lovely, nice, relaxed state, getting them lovely and relaxed, so I can have a chat with your subconscious. That's it. There's a lot of misconceptions. You're not asleep. You can hear everything. If you wanted to, if something made you feel uncomfortable, you just decided you didn't like it, you could totally just open your eyes and stand up and just say, no, don't want to do this no more. You can resist it if you really want to. Of course, 9 times out of 10, because people are paying you and they've got a problem that they want to solve, they don't do any of these things because that would make it far more difficult, basically. The other thing is, as a hypnotherapist, I don't really hypnotize you per se. I know the circumstances in which you will go into hypnosis. That might sound a bit airy-fairy, but I hope you understand what I mean. I don't physically do something to you. I just, it's not dissimilar to a sort of meditative mantra state. In fact, that's exactly what a mantra does. Is it distracts the conscious mind or gets you into a habitual loop whereby your subconscious mind can start to flourish, basically. So with stage hypnosis, there's great debate as to whether people just do it because I've never had it done to me and I've never done it. So I don't know. There is debate as to whether people are just going along with it because they've got an excuse to do it, and whether they're doing that on a subconscious level or a conscious level, if you understand. Do you know what I mean? It gives their subconscious license to do something that they wouldn't normally do, and so they go along with it. And to them, they were like, oh, I was powerless to it. So I suppose it would be not dissimilar to the concept of like, oh, we're at the end of the football and I don't know why, but we all just kicked in this shop window. I don't know why I did it now, actually. Do you know what I mean? Kind of being swept along with it. Because essentially, again, that what that is called is de-individuation. It is a type of hypnotic effect whereby people take on the attributes of the larger crowd.
Right, and also when somebody does stage hypnosis, I've researched they actually look for people that have certain characteristics when they start. They'll say certain things, and depending on the reaction of the crowd.
Yeah, there's a number of tests like clasping hands together, or just basically there's a thing where you say you've got a book in one hand and a balloon in another, and you will always pick the person that is most responsive to it. And then you'll go backstage and put them into a trance and put in these post-hypnotic triggers, essentially. Because you're not really, I think it's still illegal to actually publicly show how hypnosis works. I think it's illegal to film it. Because then people might try it. It's not. That makes it sound a lot more. It's very strange because it's incredibly effective. Incredibly effective. I've witnessed it solve what could be deemed physical symptoms, things like acne and psoriasis, and obviously things like nail biting, irritable bowel syndrome, habitual scratching, self-harming, smoking, overeating. All of these things, I've seen it and used it, and it's worked and worked permanently. So it's a bizarre old thing. So just to tie it back to what we were talking about, I suppose the CIA had infinite or seemingly infinite resources, and because of the war, the means and the needs to test it. I mean, just with hypnosis, they were doing things like, I say, splitting personalities and embedding spies. One of the things was the Joker A and Joker B, whereby they got this guy who was sort of, all-American apple pie Marine, and split his personality and turned him into a card-carrying, America-hating commie. And but personality A would ultimately have control and access to all his memories. And so they'd drop him off in behind enemy lines, and he would get in with the enemy seemingly as a traitor or a defector or whatever. They would later capture him seemingly or whatever, and be able to access all his memories. So and apparently this was going sort of backwards and forwards between various factions during World War II. So stranger things have happened.
Absolutely. And you also brought up the group consciousness a minute ago. The research that I've done, if there's a whole bunch of people together, I can't remember how many but it actually affects the IQ of that lowers people's IQs at that time. Is that correct?
I've not heard that, but I can believe it because, as I say, basically, it doesn't take an awful lot for the entire. You know what's bizarre is the larger the group, the easier they are to influence, because what happens is, say, they start to sort of identify with the enormity of the group and the security of the group, and therefore, like, you know, an idea can spread like wildfire. And you'll see that every time there's a riot, every time there's like a hockey cup win or whatever, you'll see one guy climb on something, and for a second, he's king. Do you know what I mean? The entire crowd turn around and go, "This guy! This is the guy!" Like, and you'll see that again in riots where someone climbs on a police car and lifts something up, and that's like everyone's like, "Oh, come on now, we're all going to do that." It's much more difficult to get 4 people on your side, if you know what I mean. Right. But again, there's techniques. Just as something as simple as repetition. You say something 3 or 4 times, people are far more likely to just accept it as true.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that the experts have learned over the years, whether it's in some type of sales or advertising or marketing. The same techniques are used all around. And strongly, folks, if you want to learn more about Neil or mind control tactics, techniques, make sure to pick up your copy of Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own by Neil Sanders. Also go to neilsandersmindcontrol.com. Just really good data there. Also, you're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Vimeo. Leak Project is also on YouTube, folks. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure to subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord. Get access to the latest podcast first and free. We've got well over 200 shows. We add at least one a day, sometimes more. Let me ask you this as well, Neil. With religion, it seems to be one of the most powerful forms of mind control I have ever seen. As a matter of fact, for me personally, I'll share just a personal story with you and the audience. I was raised Christian, Lutheran, and my parents were really cool. We didn't go to church every Sunday, and when we did go to church, it could be the blue jeans kind, so it wasn't like I was fundamental Christian by any means. But when I broke out of that religion, from just the research that I have done, it kind of took me on a different path. I would say I'm more agnostic now than anything, just because I don't know. I want to know, but I don't. I'm definitely searching. So I guess that's a combination of Gnosticism and agnostic, kind of total oxymoron. But regardless, the religion, even sometimes now when I think to myself, man, am I going to burn in hell because I don't believe in Jesus anymore, or I look at him in a different way, it still affects me to this day. And what is your thought on religion as a form of mind control?
It can be used as a form of mind control. I don't have a problem with religion per se, principally because of this. It's none of my business. And if it brings you joy, I'm not naive. I'm aware of the problems caused by religion. I'm aware of the cruelty sort of attributed by a lot of religions, and the money-making schemes and corruption and pedophilia, and none of that I agree with. The concept of religion, I don't have a problem with if it makes people happy, as long as they're not using it as a tool to hate on other people. Now, here's the thing, right, Kate? There's quite a famous quote by Christopher Hitchens, and I'm going to butcher it because I always do, but he says something like, "You need religion to make good people do wicked things." And this is from his book, God is Not Great. Now, I don't necessarily believe that. What I think you need is a cause to make good people do bad things. And religion can be and is an incredibly powerful cause. And therefore, in that sense, that statement is true. But so is money, so is love, so is hatred, so is nationalism. Anything, I think it becomes a problem when it becomes extremist, or it dictates that you hate other people, or it dictates that you feel a certain way about other people, or if it starts to control your thoughts. Now, you can take very, very good things from all religions, but there are also very, very hateful things in all religions. Yes, it's an incredibly powerful tool for mind control. It's sent entire nations to war, but so's commerce, so's xenophobia, so's racism. So I'm not down on religion per se, but yeah, absolutely. Of course, it can be used as an incredibly powerful mind control tool.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is because you do look at some of the extremists or situations that have happened in the past because of what they believe in, and they'll do anything because of their beliefs. And that's why I feel that way. And yet, like you say, if somebody's religious and that gets them closer to source or God or whatever it is they need to get to, that's awesome. I'm not in any way, shape, or form. I don't judge people based on their religion at all. I could care less what it is as long as you're a good person. That's really what matters to me. And that will be based upon your actions and what you want to do, in my opinion. And that's just my opinion. But let's go ahead.
I agree. I just think that the distinction needs to be made. And this is another thing because of this, again, the speed of information and the need to simplify your arguments because it's going on at 1,000,000 miles per hour and stuff like that. What gets lost sometimes is the distinction between religious people and extremists. And extremist anything is bad. Like,
it's just not balanced. You're right.
Quite. So, and that's the distinction. So, but yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh,
sorry.
no, this is great, man. I'll tell you, this is really one of the best interviews I've had in such a long time, man. I just love picking your brain, and you're so knowledgeable about this. So I really appreciate it. So let's get into the fight or flight mode. That seems to be a real powerful technique used by businesses, churches, people. Keeps you in that sort of state.
Yeah, well, there you go. Limited time offer. You're with us, you're with the terrorists. Best confess, otherwise you're going to hell. There, three methods that might, or three circumstances that might heighten your fight or flight mechanism, basically. It's invoked all the time, as you say, in advertising. One of the things about advertising is it's about fear of missing out, or there's two things essentially: trying to project an image outside to other people, and fear of missing out. And so by that, in both instances, it can cause that fight or flight mechanism. Because again, although it doesn't seem important, it's obviously important to some people on a social level. You know, they like nice things or whatever. It doesn't seem important in a hunter-gatherer sense, but it kind of is, again, because basically that's people trying to get on in life and trying to be more successful. I think the problem is that because basically we've got, you know, it's very rare that you'll have to go out and hunt and gather nowadays, that you have skewed needs and wants. I mean, that's sort of the genius of advertising, is to convince people that they need that consume just for frivolous pleasure. Which is not a bad thing, you know, but it was engineered that way. There was a time where people didn't, and the reason it was engineered was to make people money. Now, the flip side of this is you get stuff like PlayStations and guitars and DVD box sets and books and whatnot produced en masse. The flip side to that is that basically, what the bloody hell have we done with ourselves? Because it's gone clearly too far. Politicians use fight or flight all the time. It's just an appeal to fear. They'll give you black and white choices so that you've got no time to really think about it. And trauma is the best thing. It's interesting. We were talking about obviously earlier the Tavistock methodology. This is I would suggest used by, I mean, there's numerous instances. Look at Operation Gladio, is obviously the famous one where the Italian government colluded with right-wing groups to murder its own citizens and blame it on left-wing communist groups in order to better influence the government. And this was, I believe NATO was involved in that as well. So these things do happen. People aren't, rich people are in power. Civilization is in place, and they want it to stay in place exactly as it is, with perhaps them getting better off. So yeah, absolutely, it's totally utilized all the time. And what it does is say it just turns you into, you need to react, and it limits your choices. You don't have time to think when you're in fight or flight mode. You know, a lion is running towards you. You've got two choices: you can punch it, or you can run away. The choice that is not available to you is to go, lion, eh? Well, let me think what I can remember about a lion. No. Wait. Let's think about this sensibly. Let's just think about this sensibly. Well, if he's jumping at me like that, it's going to take him out, and you're dead. So that's the point. And your brain again knows this. They're terribly good. People in power and people in advertising, people who wish to influence you in one way or another, appealing to subconscious influences, subconscious instincts, and usually in such a way that by the time you've realised that you were tricked, it's too late. Like when you've come home from the shops and you've put on your Air Jordans, you're like, these aren't comfortable, and I can't pay my light bill. Damn.
But they look good, man. They look good.
It's
all about the shoes.
Jordans make me laugh because, like, essentially, what was the point of Jordans? So that you might be able to play a bit like Michael Jordan.
Right.
Okay. They're so expensive. You don't want to play basketball in your J's. Like, are you stupid? Like, you know. Like, it amazes me.
And they
But-
cost about 30 cents to make in Indonesia or China or somewhere. Man, it's crazy. Yeah, that's the
Thanks.
power of marketing right there.
But this is exactly the point. It's a perception. Do you know what I mean? Everything is worth as much as you think it's worth. iPhones aren't worth that much. Diamonds is the key one. Essentially, due to I mean, they don't quite have it anymore. But essentially, due to the monopolization of the market by De Beers and the limited quantities that they release and them setting the prices, diamonds, cost a lot of money. And they're synonymous with glamour and love and engagement rings. You've got to buy a diamond engagement ring. Well, before 1948, you didn't. Diamonds weren't expensive in the early 40s, particularly because of the war. And diamonds aren't expensive. They're not rare. They're not rare in an economic sense because supply vastly outweighs demand. So why do they cost so much? Well, because of a marketing campaign by NWA. They associated diamonds with love and glamour by paying Hollywood celebrities to wear them, and by going around schools and telling girls about this new thing it wasn't a new thing, but it was a rare thing, engagement rings, and specifically diamond engagement rings, and started putting it through stories, Pulp Fiction, films and the like, that if you really serious about each other, you get an engagement ring. It went further because basically what they discovered was that people were buying them together. Okay, that's pretty good, but the bloody women, sensible women, would buy the cheapest and say, well, let's put the rest of the money towards the house. So they had to nip that in the bud. So they invented the concept of the surprise proposal. That traditional thing that everybody does nowadays, invented by an American advertising agency in 1948. And essentially what they did was they said, you need to pick a suitably romantic location, and you need to buy the biggest ring that you can afford. In fact, if they set prices, if it's anything less than a month's wages, or 2 months in America, or 3 months in Japan, I believe it was, then you don't love these women enough. And they let women know that was just what was expected of them. So, obviously the more you spend, the more you love your fiance.
Right.
So, yeah.
Wow. That's powerful to think about. And then you just come up with other ideas. Okay, well, let's look at the marketing used with certain sports cars.
Yeah.
Electronics, different genres out there, and then it all just starts to make sense, and people that are listening to this podcast should certainly know what to look for now and what influences you behind the scenes. And another thing I want to throw out there real quick is so many people that I talk to, even family members that I know, and I warn them about this stuff, they like to go to sleep with the television set on. So what do? They fall asleep, and then there's all these commercials, and it just goes right to the subconscious because they're asleep, and then I think it has more impact. So have you done research into that aspect?
Well, again, I think there's debate on how influential sleep learning is. Some studies will tell you that it's effective. Some studies will tell you that it's it's nonsense. It can't be done. It's it's debatable. But there's several stages when you're not in deep sleep, when you're still sort of taking everything in. So I think certainly at the point when you're falling to sleep, it may be very influential, to be quite honest. But it's I mean, advertising works best when you don't realize that or sales techniques work best like magic tricks when you don't realize that they're being done to you. When you go, oh, I know what this guy's doing, he's gonna start talking all macho to me or whatever, or go, hang on, let me just get off the phone a minute, mate. Yes, sorry, mate. I've just spoken to my manager, and he's looked over your sort of purchasing history with us, and I really shouldn't do this, but because you've been a good customer, I'm gonna knock $50 off the overall price. Yeah, does that sound good to you? Yeah, that sound right? Do you want to go for that? Nice one. Right, that's called a drop close sale technique. It's, once you know that, it doesn't work. Do you know what I mean?
It'll offend most people, but yet there's those out there that like to be sold sometimes, and they're just looking for that. And you're like, oh yeah, that sounds good, okay, which is totally cool either way.
It's fine. It's retail therapy. I mean, it's terrible that you.
That's a perfect name. I love that.
But it does, it makes you feel better. But the problem is are these things really real, or are they aspirational? And the problem with things is they start to own you. The more stuff you've got, the more stress. And the more, the Sims, computer game.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody got that. It was supposed to be a satire. What nobody seemed to pick up on was the more stuff you bought and the wealthier your character became, the more problems you had, and the more unhappy your character was. And apparently the writers of the game wrote it as a satire, but literally nobody understood it. So it managed to slip everyone by. But
that's a good point.
Well, here's the two things I wanted to say this about because you mentioned cars, right? Here's the two principal ways that you sell cars, right? Well, is how you sell most things is you appeal to their instinct or the reptilian brain because your reptilian urge will always, always win, and then to make sure you justify intellectually. So you sell it as either a weapon or as a way to get sex. So most cars are like, you get this, you're going to look sexy, someone might have sex with you. And then the intellectual way will be like, it's a status symbol. It shows that you're successful. You deserve it. You
5-star
deserve a
crash
bit of...
test rating.
Yeah, exactly. Or the other one is for things like Hummers and stuff like that. No one's going to mess with me when I'm in that. That's a weapon. I mean, it is. It's a military vehicle. And the justification for that is that Sandra and the kids will be really safe in it.
Right, right.
So,
That's a good point. And then you also look at, from what I've done research on, the way to sell anybody, whether they're engineer or construction worker or somebody that works in Hollywood, the best way is to get them emotionally attached, and then, like you said, add the reinforcement with intellect after that.
yeah, totally. It's you sell to people on an emotional basis and an irrational basis. The second you start to rationalize, you're not going to buy stuff, like because if you needed it, you'd buy it. If someone needs to sell it to you, then why? Because there's not an immediate need for it. But you don't sell things to people. You do people favors. Like you never sell anything. You do them a favor. Like, oh, I'm gonna do this great deal or whatever, or I'm gonna do this. This is going to be beneficial for you. I really shouldn't do this, mate, but X, Y, and Z. And so, yeah, it's one of the principles of selling. You become friends with the person. Not really, but you become friends with them and try and influence them in certain ways. Mirror their actions. Swear every so often because it makes you sound passionate. And, stuff like that. Give them a coffee. In fact, give them several coffees because that speeds up their thinking.
And is it true if you give somebody something warm, like a warm drink, especially if it's cold outside, at first it builds an automatic bond?
It can do. There's lots of things basically. Yeah, pretty much. It's an act of kindness. But you want to. There's lots of things. Speak first, shake their hand, ask them questions. Essentially, make the other person feel important. Everyone likes to feel important, so that's how you appeal to somebody. You make them feel part of a group or very important for something, and you do that by asking questions and repeat their name over and over and over and over again.
Now, as far as sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, just because that'll increase your sales, apparently.
Okay, and now one thing I've also noticed is it seems like there's more phobias out there now than there was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Just turn on the TV. Maybe it's because of the programs that are out there to kind of push that, but are phobias, do you think, oftentimes persuaded by some type of traumatic experience, mind control techniques or something?
Well, phobias can be attributed to a number of things. Like sometimes it can be not really connected with the actual thing that you're technically afraid of. It could, you've reacted. It's strange, like because basically, like, so if you came to me as a hypnotherapist, I've got a fear of spiders. And you'd probably say, oh, it's this. I remember this spider falling on me and blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's not technically that that's caused it. You've reacted to that situation, but lots of different people have reacted to that, have had a similar situation and not had the exact same outcome. So what was it that caused you to react in that particular way? And it must be some way that you feel about yourself, some belief that you have about yourself, and some other slightly more complicated reaction. So it's difficult. I think particularly in America, and I only say this because it's not to denigrate Americans, it's just because basically advertising of medication is available. I think there's two things that sometimes play into it. It's quite comforting to be told what's wrong with you, because then essentially you've got a response to it or a cure. That's one thing. I've seen American drug advertising, and it's incredibly aggressive. They just list conditions of human life until you go, yeah, I'm going to buy that. And the other thing is that basically, and again, this is pushed in American medical advertising a lot, the victim card, playing the victim card is quite attractive. Maybe not on the surface, but it gives you an excuse. Like, I'd be in the pros right now if it wasn't for this bum knee. Like, do you know what I mean? It's probably not that. It's probably that you didn't practice hard enough. But if you've got an excuse, that's why my life's not very successful, because I've got this. I know I've got this because I'm on these tablets for it. Not in all cases, and you know, again, I'm not to have a go at anyone that has got a problem, but these are the things that people can fall into that are played upon by certain advertisers because they're nefarious sods and they want to sell you stuff. They don't really care about you, but they want to give you the impression of caring about you. And the problem with both of those conditions is that essentially you're using that as a crutch. And the more you use it, the harder it is going to get out of that loop. And maybe it's very successful for you. Maybe it's the best thing that's ever happened to you. Maybe it won't actually have a detrimental effect. In some cases, you know, it will, because sooner or later you're going to realize, damn, this doesn't work anymore, or you know, I've been left behind by all my friends who are off doing this because I can't go because X, Y, and Z. And that's even before you start to get into all the sort of negative and horrible side effects of drugs and stuff like that. So it is a minefield.
Right, absolutely. And once again, I'd like to recommend our listeners go to neilsandersmindcontrol.com. He's also on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Vimeo, and the books, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. Now, you've got more than one version of that, don't you?
Yeah, well, it's in 2 volumes basically, which was it was meant to be one, but it was too big, and it was just like it would have just been too expensive to sell to people if it was in one. So the first one is broken down into sort of the nuts and bolts of sort of MK Ultra and the American, the UK, and some Russian and communist mind control methods, and all the various declassified documents and people involved in it, and the doctors and the methodology and the technology, and various aspects. It tries to sort of run the whole gamut of that, and then it sort of talks about the Phoenix program, which was a sort of campaign of terror against civilians. That was a campaign that was spurred by the CIA essentially in the Vietnam War. And then it finishes with an essay that talks about, it sort of expands on Dave McGowan's work and talks about the fact that possibly the explosion in serial killers was maybe a domestic Phoenix operation, because essentially all of a sudden American citizens were faced with this new terror that struck at random, you know, it killed without sensible motive, killed women, killed children, killed men, killed in your own home, killed when you were hitchhiking, killed when you're walking through a dark park. And again, you know, fear is a very effective way of controlling people. And the second volume is called Marketing, Movies and Music, and you know, it looks at all those. It looks at advertising, the construction of brand, various aspects of how marketing tricks you, and the sorts of nefarious tactics that they use. The film industry, the news media, the music industry, and then it finishes up with an essay talking about the hippie movement, and the possibility that basically that was an experiment by the CIA, principally because all the people that were supplying the drugs were CIA agents. So that was my first clue. Yeah, they're both available on my website, but they're also available on Amazon as well. If you know, they're a lot cheaper, and they're on Kindle, because I know everyone, you know, that's the way that people do things nowadays.
It certainly seems to be kind of taking over. Now, have you seen that movie that was released about a year and a half ago called American Ultra?
No, I haven't. But I've been told about it, and I keep meaning to watch it, but I haven't got around to it. It's Jesse Eisenberg, isn't it? And apparently it's like a mixture between The Bourne Identity and Naked Gun or something, isn't it? Apparently, but yeah, I'm aware of it.
Right on. Well, Neil, this has just been a pleasure to speak with you. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and coming on here with us at the Leak Project. And once again, folks, make sure to check out Neil's website, neilsandersmindcontrol.com. He's got a really cool blog on there, and the book, 2 parts, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. Thank you, Neil. I really look forward to speaking with you again sometime.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. I'd be delighted to come back anytime at all.
Fantastic. And folks, also, I just want to let you know real quick, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/clandestineTimeLord, leakproject.com. Stay safe and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have Neil Sanders from thetruthseekersguide.blogspot.com. He is an expert in mind control tactics that are used by the powers that be and forces behind the scenes, everything from marketing, sales, indoctrination, programming, you name it. The list goes on and on. And one of the really cool things about Neil and his website is you can get to actual data and not just fluff from what somebody's uncle said at a dinner party many years ago. So this might just give you a different perspective on how easy it is to influence the masses, especially those that aren't in the know. Neil, it's great to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Just a real pleasure to speak with somebody like yourself that has so much knowledge and astute with this topic. I started researching mind control about 10 years ago and learned about the different conversational hypnosis tactics that people like neurolinguistic programming, when you've got these very fluent individuals, whether they work for a corporation or in the government, political leaders, those that speak at religious gatherings, etc. And it really just opened my mind to how much is actually out there. And a lot of times people do it and they don't even realize it. They're just natural at it. But once you really become aware of how to use these tactics, I guess you could say, you can either use them for good or bad, I feel. And the people that are using them the majority of the time don't have our best interests at heart. So if you would, please tell us a little bit about yourself and why you got into this form of research.
Well, it was kind of just by accident, really. I did psychology and like media production at university, and all the technology that I learned on is now completely obsolete. but there's sort of the techniques and what I discovered was that psychology actually bleeds into advertising quite a lot, and even something as basic as just constructing an advert or constructing a scene in a film. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, playing on like instinctual drives and that sort of thing. And basically, a friend of mine, or an older friend, forced me to watch a film called The Manchurian Candidate with Frank Sinatra in. And I was quite young, so I wasn't really that keen. But it blew my mind because it introduced me to different concepts, like the concept of essentially a false flag assassination attempt, but also obviously the mind control. And it really struck a chord with me because I've been sort of learning about Freud and the subconscious mind and a little bit about how hypnosis worked and stuff like that. And I started to think, oh yeah, that's fairly plausible, to be quite honest. So from there on, I sort of got into reading the books, really. Colin Ross and Jim Keith and John Marks and Dave McGowan was very, very good. His book was superb, in fact. And just started from then on, that gave me sort of avenues to look into. And you know how it is. Once you start to learn something, everything you see sort of starts to pique your interest. And so all of a sudden, different newspaper articles about, say, companies like Raytheon testing voice-to-skull technology on prisoners, all of a sudden piqued my interest in a way that it hadn't in the past. Or the British Army utilising SAS soldiers who've got complete perfect, or what they would call a perfect psychopathic personality, and trying to emulate and paste their brain patterns onto other soldiers so that they could all be this perfect psychopath, which is ideal for a soldier, I suppose. And just started to sort of amass more knowledge, really, just reading around the subject. And I was amazed how much declassified documentation there is. I mean, with MK Ultra itself, there was 149 sub-projects that we know about. I mean, basically, a whole series of papers was discovered by mistake. Some by John Marks, who put a Freedom of Information Act in, and some were sent to were filed under the wrong sort of heading, and so were discovered completely by accident. But as I said, from there you discovered that there was 149 at least sub-projects in mind control in just the American program. And they cover the entire gamut of social control, be that propaganda or social influence, or right down to the really sort of personal stuff, like trying to control your thoughts and control your actions and turn you into, essentially a remote-controlled robot.
Right. It's funny, too, because I watched a program the other day on Netflix. It just came out. It was kind of a low-budget film, but it was actually pretty good, especially the concept. And I brought this up one time before. These kids that were going to, I think, Caltech University, they were working on this technology to be able to read somebody's mind. And they finally figured it out. And then the government got a hold of it. They had these plants that were working in Caltech, pretending to be college students, but they really worked with black ops, with certain corporations that were kind of funded by CIA and different alphabet agencies. And to make a long story short, when they got this tech, at first they thought that it was just going to be something that was going to be able to help people. But then, obviously, the powers that be wanted to use it to not only read people's minds, but to put thoughts in people's minds and control them. And the way that they were able to do it was they implanted these carbon tubes, these nanocarbon tubes, via injection into the spine. Therefore, it went into the bloodstream, and then that goes into the brain. So these nanoparticulates that turn into these carbon nanotubes actually allow this tech to work. And then they said, well, why don't we put it in the vaccines? So when babies are born, we'll inject them with this tech. And there's been a lot of stuff on alternative forums that have talked about trial runs where they've actually used certain nanotech in vaccines like the swine flu vaccine. I don't have any verification of that, but with so many of those being made in China nowadays, how easy would it be for a government like China, or even just influences of the government, people behind the scenes, to put that kind of stuff in this technology? Are they already there at that level, or is that next gen stuff?
Well, I mean, John Lilly and Antoine Raymond were talking in the sort of late 60s, early 70s about the ability to put implants into people's skulls with just a few. It sounds quite barbaric, but apparently it's quite painless and quick. Injecting straight through the skull and leaving what would be called a guideline, so that you could basically put an implant in to whatever degree. Now, obviously, that is slightly different to what you're talking about, but this was obviously many years ago. I have heard of in other sort of medical faculties the concept of sort of directed injections that sort of, if they put them in the correct place in the bloodstream, that can get to the correct organ or whatever. So I would suppose it's entirely plausible. With to be quite honest, with most countries, they have more broad systems of control that keep people in line, to be quite honest. So could they do that? In theory, I suppose, yes, they probably could by now. Would they do that? I don't know that they would deem it totally necessary at the minute, because, there are dozens and dozens of hidden and not so hidden control mechanisms that basically make the majority of people not be aware of what's going on. And, to paraphrase Noam Chomsky, not even be aware that they're not aware of what's going on.
Right. Well, it seems like there's this real big disconnect, and those that are awake are kind of put on different paths so many times, it's tough to find the truth through all the BS. Yet
Absolutely.
We continue to search for it. And then you've got those that have the cognitive dissonance to the point of they don't want to know, or they just won't accept it, even if it's right in their face. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the psychology, the conditioning, the programming, the subliminal stuff that's out there. But talk to us about some of these documents and research that you've been able to obtain that would just blow somebody's mind, literally.
Well, I mean, just to sort of go to your immediate point about cognitive dissonance, perhaps, and that sort of thing. Why would people do that? Well, why, when you present them with facts, would they literally do a sort of Orwellian doublethink and move on? And a lot of that is perhaps to do with the concepts that were put forward by the Tavistock Institute. And the Tavistock Institute, you can find out these things about them. These started out as the Tavistock Clinic in 1921. It was formed to help soldiers that were coming home with shell shock, later known as a post-traumatic stress disorder. And later it expanded into the Tavistock Institute. So it started to look at more aspects of psychology, all to do with social psychology, to be quite honest. I mean, what the documentation seems to show is that when they were also connected to propaganda institutes like Crewe House and Wellington House, who were completely influential in directing people towards the war, and later helping direct Americans towards the Second World War. But rather than sort of helping shell-shocked soldiers, what they actually appeared to have been doing was doing experiments, testing the breaking point of man and seeing what could be done with somebody that was in a completely vegetative or malleable state, or somebody whose mind is cracked, if they can be of any use at all. And later they expanded, as I say, to the Tavistock Institute and started. This is where it gets really weird, because they started setting up and helping set up places like MIT and Stanford Research Institute and the National Institute of Mental Health in America and the Rand Institute and Esalen. And also they do something called authority and training, which is basically teaching CEOs of blue chip companies or politicians how to be better at their job. Now, how this becomes a bit sinister is that one of Tavistock's chief sort of techniques was devised by a gentleman called Kurt Lewin, who took over the Tavistock Institute in 1932. And he suggested two things, well, essentially the same thing. Future shock, which is essentially it's society changing far too fast for the population to cope with, or alternatively he suggested that trauma or traumatic experiences should be imposed on the civilian population from an exterior point, so that this would basically reduce them to a state that he called either fluidity, a childlike state, or a tabula rasa, which is a completely blank slate that can be reprogrammed. And he says that in these times, when you're you're faced with great trauma, you will turn to an authority figure in order to be appeased of this and to get some sort of help. And thereby societies can be more easily controlled. This was taken further by Eric Trist, who was speaking to a press conference in 1965 when he was the director of the Tavistock Institute, said that the world, basically what their job was to do was to create social turbulence. Social turbulence was designed to make it so that people couldn't critically analyze situations and would need an authority figure to help them through life. And he proudly boasted in 1965 that thanks to the efforts of Tavistock and all their shock troops sent out to all these various institutions around the world, that the world was now in an irreversible state of social turbulence. So there's just a tiny bit of documentation that this is all provable. Once you're getting into say MK Ultra, then the documentation and the things that were done were incredible. Manchurian candidates were created, truth serums were tried, people were tortured with drugs, memories were wiped, personalities were created and destroyed. It even goes on to putting voices into people's heads, making people feel emotions, completely robotizing people so that they have essentially remote control functions, and to animals as well as later seemingly people. It was monstrous. It was absolutely monstrous. A lot of it involved, drugging people, torturing people, keeping people isolated. And a lot of it was, this is the overarching reason for that America apparently got into mind control was as a response to communist methods of mind control that were shown during the Korean War. But it actually it transpires that the Americans had started their investigations into mind control many years before the start of the Korean War. So this was in itself a mind control program. But what was most horrifying was that a lot of these experiments were done on unwitting citizens, unwitting civilians, and they were done under the guise of medical procedures that were designed to help people, specifically people with depression, postnatal depression, and alcoholism and that type of thing. So it got pretty monstrous.
Let me talk to you about some of the MK Ultra stuff, because from the research that I have done, and I haven't even been able to get, I'm sure, a tenth of what actually took place, but talk about some torture stuff where they would take people, fill their drinks up with LSD, hook them up to these lights or into these brain sensory mechanisms that messed with what they would see and feel. And then I heard stuff about how children would be literally killed in front of other children, and that would cause some type of fragmentation of the brain so that they could have these different authors and different personalities, and they'd see other babies in cages that were shocked and stuff like that. Is any of that available public record, or do you think that is not true?
Well, when it comes down to torture, a lot of it is on record. The point with a lot of the experiments was to do the breaking of man. A lot of it has actually been denounced as torture. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit fuzzy, because Joseph Mengele was doing experiments that seemed to be pertaining towards mind control, certainly at other Nazi institutes and concentration camps. They were doing experiments with mescaline and other drugs in order to break the will of prisoners. As I say,